Hi, my name is Sarah and welcome back to Freshly Read Books. So this week I've got another Booker video for you. So one of the long listed books that I have not yet reviewed, and that took me quite a while to read despite it being one of the shorter books on the list. That's right, today we are talking about How Much of These Hills Is Gold by C. Pam Jung. So first off, synopsis of the book. This book is largely about Lucy and Sam, more focused really on Lucy, who are children of Chinese immigrants and are living in California during the gold rush. It kicks off when their father, referred to as Ba, passes away in the middle of the night. They've already lost their mother, Ma, and all of a sudden they're finding themselves completely on their own in this world, and they have the appearance of not belonging because they're Chinese, but they were born in this country and they don't know anything besides this country. They do know some Mandarin, learning mostly from their mother, but other than that, they really only know tales of China, and mostly they just know where they've lived their whole lives. Their ages are 11 and 12, and so they're very young and needing to deal with this on their own, and basically everybody just feels as though they don't belong because they look different. They don't look like the other immigrants that are living here. Obviously, the US is a country of immigrants. That's the thing. So it's kind of insane to be like, oh, but those immigrants are different. But, you know, I guess it's annoying to know just how long America has held this view and that it still kind of feels like it does. But that's neither here nor there. So reading this book, I struggled a lot. Okay, so here's my initial thoughts on the book and my timeline as far as reading it. At the beginning, I started out and like the first 10 to 20-ish pages, I was like, all right, I'm into this, this is good. And then after that, it was kind of like this gradual decline, maybe even a little flat line at the bottom. And I was just struggling to get through it. I was bored, if I'm being quite honest. I didn't feel like the messages necessitated the amount of time that was going into explaining certain scenes, and it just really lost a lot of what it initially had for me in the beginning. And then I stopped reading it for weeks. In fact, I rented this book from the library, and I had it for so long that I ran out of renews I had on it and had to return it. So actually, in past videos of me talking about the Booker, back when I had all of the Booker books that I currently had at the time on this little shelf back here, I ended up needing to finish this as an ebook, still a rental from the library, but yeah, because I didn't read through the physical copy that I had from the library quickly enough. So that was a bit of me admitting defeat, I guess, but I just couldn't do it. I was bored. So yeah, there was a few weeks where I didn't touch it, and then finally I was like, all right, now's the time. Like, I've already started this one, I should finish this one before continuing on for the couple that I have left on the list. I picked it back up, I remained bored until about halfway, and then something changed. I don't know what it was, but I started getting more into it, and I liked the metaphors that were being drawn. I liked the themes that were coming up. There were quotes that I really liked. And all of a sudden it was like changing paths for me. If the book had stayed like it was for the second half of it the whole time, then this would have been a book that I really enjoyed. However, I can't ignore the fact that for the first section of the book, I had such a hard time reading it that I put it down for a while, even though it would have been a lot easier at times to have just finished that book to film my next review, as opposed to starting an entirely new book off the Booker long list and filming that review. Like, it just made more sense to, you know, finish the book you've started, but I couldn't do it. It was putting me squarely in a reading slump. I was having a really hard time. Yeah, I can't ignore that. So my feelings overall about the book are okay. There are parts of it that I really liked, and then of course the beginning I didn't love. And actually I was watching an interview with C. Pam Jung about her writing the book, and initially the first part was a short story, that it was never intended to be a full novel, except that she couldn't get the characters out of her head, and so she figured if she wrote their whole story, then that would be the way to get them out. And that makes sense to me because there was a little bit at the beginning where I was like, all right. I mean, it starts with their Ba having just passed away and Sam and Lucy needing to kind of readjust and figure out where they're going to go from here. And there's a lot that happens in that initial scene, and then it feels like nothing happens for a very long time after that. So it was a little bit like, oh yeah, I could see how this could have been a short story on its own. I'm glad that I didn't see that interview before I read it, because I think I would have assumed that the rest of the book would continue being how it was, that like the rest of the book that wasn't a part of the short story. But you know, it did pick up, for me at least. I know that a lot of people really loved this book, and I'm not really in that camp, but I did like it, and I'm very thankful for that because I was struggling. All right, so let's get into the themes. My favorite part, hopefully yours too, considering it's the bulk of all of my review videos. So there are just 3 themes this time that I'd like to touch on, and let's go ahead and start with the concept of gold, because obviously this is going to hold a lot of weight to it, no pun intended. Because it's, of course, in the title itself. The book is told during the gold rush, and that's a large part of the livelihood of Lucy and Sam's Ba. But I think that a lot of this book was kind of talking about what gold could be for different people. Not, of course, actual gold, but what is that little thing that you're looking for in life that you feel like, oh, once I get it, like once I get enough of that thing, I'm good, I'm gonna be happy, everything's gonna be wonderful. Because that's how Ba sees gold, of course. If he could just find enough, then they would be set. Everything would be good, everybody could be happy, he could stop being so stressed that everybody's relying on him. But there's, you know, different gold to different people. Lucy, for example, is wanting to kind of be in a town and fit in and be a part of this country that she's lived in, be a part of these towns that she was born near, and like she belongs in this country, she was born in this country, and she never really feels this sense of belonging. And so I think that for her, belonging is something that she really seeks out. Sam feels more like a man than a woman, despite the fact that he was born into a female body. And I even struggle with pronouns because Sam doesn't really, there's not really much talk about what Sam would prefer or anything along those lines. Sam's referred to with different pronouns throughout the book, but I don't think that at the time, of course, there wasn't as much knowledge about it as there is now. I don't think that there would have been even the thought to go by they. So Sam may have been non-binary, or may have just felt completely like a male in a female's body and would in other circumstances transition. I do believe, based on what we see of Sam in the book, that Sam would transition if given the opportunity. But so that's what Sam's kind of looking for, is to be fully his or her or their self, and feeling fully in Sam's own body. Sorry, I know I said Sam a lot. It's just purely because I honestly don't know what pronoun to use, if I should use he or if I should use they. I definitely don't think that Sam would want to be using she, but of course, Sam is a fictional character and I can't exactly ask Sam. And then Ma, Sam and Lucy's mother, largely it seems like she just wants to have stability within her family. Her ultimate wish would be to go back to China and to raise her family there, and to be among the people that look like them, that talk like them, at least in Ma's case. She largely wants to keep Mandarin alive in their family, and she doesn't really feel like she belongs in this country. And of course, she wasn't born in America, so she came over during the gold rush. So she even more so doesn't feel like she belongs, and she feels like there is somewhere else that she belongs. That's the big difference between, say, Ma and Lucy. Lucy doesn't have a different area where it feels like she more belongs there because the people look like her. She just feels like she belongs in the country she was born in, but is constantly made aware of the fact that she doesn't look like somebody that belongs there. There's also a lot of talk about luck, being lucky or unlucky, and Ma believes that this area is just an unlucky area for them, that they're never going to be able to get out purely because they don't have any luck there, that is an element that's needed in order to escape, and that they'll never be a successful family unit if they stay there, that they have to make it back to China in order to get luck. So that's that could be honestly its own theme. It's just that one didn't appeal quite as much to me as this concept of like, what are people really striving for? And I think that like lends itself into, well, where do these people really belong? Like, where do Sam and Lucy belong? They were born in America. They feel purely American because it's all they really know. But if nobody else feels like they belong there, like, are those people allowed to say? And your gut reaction is, well, no, of course not. But if they don't feel like they fit in, then that makes it a lot harder for them to really feel like they're at home. If everybody around you is constantly pointing out that this isn't your home, it's harder to have it feel like home. Okay, so in looking back, I really kind of talked about two themes there, because my plan was to talk about gold and then to also talk about the sense of belonging and where home is. But those kind of just ended up meshing into one theme, so we're just gonna go with it. So those were the first two themes that I had to talk about. And then lastly, I want to talk about my favorite theme from this book. What really cinched it for me, and I think that it kind of got more into it after the halfway point in the book, which I think contributed a large part to me really liking the book a lot more. And that was the idea of history, like learning history, the stories of the area, and how something gets passed along through generations so that people years from now are learning the history of the area and what does that look like to them. So Lucy is really fascinated in history, but she struggles with this concept of hearing how Ba talks about the history of the area, what he's seen in his lifetime and what he knows. And then also once she goes to school, learning history from a teacher and seeing, oh, well, this doesn't really match up right away, and then feeling as though, oh, well, it either has to be one thing or the other. Either Ba is telling the truth and his history is 100% correct, or the teacher is telling the truth and that history that's in textbooks is 100% correct. But as the story goes on, you kind of realize, well, maybe the truth is somewhere in the middle. So a quote that does a really good job of summing this up was, "Easier by far to read the history that Teacher Lee teaches. Those names and dates, orderly as bricks, stacked to build a civilization." I think that for Lucy, seeing these textbooks, having Teacher Lee explain the history of this land, explain history in general in a way that makes sense, where there's dates, where there's bullet points, that these things happened in this order at this time, it's really easy to look at that and say, oh, well, that's so well organized, like that has to be the truth, because clearly somebody's really thought this out. And one would hope that yes, that would be true, but history is of course more than just dates and bullet points of things that happened. You don't really get to see how that played out among the people, and even if you do, then that can be where opinion comes into play. It's funny because when you're living in the present moment, as we all are, like there's ever a time that you're not, but in the present moment, you can look at the things that are happening around you and see how divided people are. And yes, I know this is a particularly divisive time, but in general, I think that this remains to be true. People see certain events, things that happen, differently than other people. Some people might see something as being a really good thing, while others might see it as being a really bad thing. And of course, it's a very simplified version, but to take it just like a little bit further, there might be a person that thinks that events A, B, and C are what led to, you know, this catastrophe happening. And there might be somebody else that thinks, well, actually it was X, Y, Z that led to that catastrophe happening. And in reality, it was probably a mixture of them, but our history books are not always going to be able to cover all of those pieces. And also whoever's writing those history books, whoever is within that company. If it's not a diverse enough company, you might not hear a diverse enough history. There are a lot of different ways that this can go wrong, and when you have largely one party telling history, you're probably only going to be hearing one party's history. And for Lucy, that meant that she largely knew the history of the area itself, but not as it related to Chinese immigrants. She didn't really know that history. And she hears how Ba tells the history of the area and sees those differences and is really unsure of what's true and what's false. And for a while, she just is like, I'm just going to believe the history books. And she starts kind of disregarding things that her Ba tells her. And I think that the cool thing the book does is, as the reader, you kind of agree with her, because Ba is seen, especially towards the beginning, as this very idealistic person that's constantly trying to push to the next place and trying to find gold where he can, and always getting to a place too late. But as the story goes on and you get to hear more of Ba's backstory, and you get to see more flashbacks of Lucy with Ba, of Sam with Ba, of the whole family together, you get to kind of understand his character a little bit more. And it's interesting, you almost kind of grow up with Lucy throughout the book, where at least I felt this way. While I was reading it, I was pretty much in agreement with how Lucy felt most of the time. And I was in agreement with her at the beginning of the book, how she felt about her Ba, and towards the end I was in agreement with her how she felt, how that transitioned into different feelings about him and different feelings about her Ma as well, which is like a whole story unto itself. But I don't want to get too into it. I do think that this book, there are spoilers for this one, that there were moments where I was surprised to hear something. I think I am glad that I read it, because this did get me thinking, and about things that I had not really thought of, or had not really thought of as in depth. So as far as that goes, it was a good experience. I do know that if this wasn't on the Booker long list, I probably would have given up when I put it down. So, like, could I recommend the book as a whole? I think if you're already interested in the story, then you would like it. It's definitely like a Western tale. I think it's really cool that we have a Western that is told with Chinese, or I guess children of immigrants. And I think that that is a really interesting thing, because a lot of the Westerns that we have obviously don't have those characters in them, or aren't centered on them. And so that's definitely an interesting thing about the book. So if you're looking for something like that, if you like Western tales, but if you want to see something that's different than just like a white family that you've seen written a million times, then I do think that this pulls a lot more into question than the traditional Western novels do. And if you're already drawn to those, then I think that you would like this book. Okay, let's do rankings. Now, typically at this point, I just try to remember the way that I ranked in the past, but I have ranked quite a few of them at this point, and I'm a little bit worried that I'll get them wrong. And while I would hope that I would actually remember my rankings, or be ranking the same way if I was doing it right now, we know that that's not necessarily going to be the case. Okay, so the rankings I have so far, and disclaimer if you haven't watched my videos before, these rankings are not like who I think is gonna win or whatever, but are purely my thoughts, my personal feelings about the books, which books I liked best. You know, completely personal. Okay, so starting at the top is Burnt Sugar, then Real Life, This Mournable Body, The New Wilderness, Love and Other Thought Experiments, Shuggie Bain, The Shadow King, and then Such a Fun Age. I think this actually pretty easily fits into 5th place. So being right behind The New Wilderness and right in front of Love and Other Thought Experiments. For The New Wilderness, like, I enjoyed that book thoroughly my entire way through reading it, so it makes sense to put this book after that one. For Love and Other Thought Experiments, I went through a whole roller coaster of emotions where I really liked it at some points, I was really bored at other points, and I think it went through an opposite, like an inverse graph than my feelings about How Much of These Hills Is Gold, because I started for most of the beginning really liking it, and then towards the end I had a really hard time picking it up. The only reason why I still finished it as quickly as I did was purely because I was close to the end when I hit that point, as opposed to How Much of These Hills Is Gold, which I only got like 60 to 70 pages in before feeling like I didn't want to keep going. But How Much of These Hills Is Gold, maybe it's because it ended stronger than I felt like Love and Other Thought Experiments did, but I do think that belongs above that book. So it's the new 5th place book, which, since that knocks Love and Other Thought Experiments out of my top 5, it does mean that I was officially wrong about that book from when I talked about it in my initial long list predictions video. In my initial video, I predicted what 5 books I would like the most out of the entire long list. I think I've been right about just 2 of them so far. And one of those books was Love and Other Thought Experiments, which of course now cannot end in the top 5 spot anymore. So I know for sure that I was wrong about that book, but you know, it happens. All right, so that's gonna do it for this video. Please let me know if you've read How Much These Hills is Gold, how you found it. Did you have the same problem that I did? Were you bored for a lot of the beginning? I'd be very curious to know. And if you want to see more book reviews that I have done, I've got an entire playlist that you can find either in the info card or also in the description below. And if you want to see more content from me in the future, then do consider subscribing, and I will see you in the next one.